So if that's the case, let's let's study or discuss very briefly a similar type of subservient view, but one where the type of obedience that needs to be offered is qualified differently.
Okay.
What about those who may suggest that the obedience required is not a type of a condign merit, even an ex pacto condign type of merit? So it's not substantially the same as what Adam was required to offer. Even Adam's obedience didn't earn anything before God other than God establishing the terms in the covenant. So we want to make sure no one misunderstands me there. But what about those who would say we have here an arrangement in which this is substantially a covenant of works, but it's qualified, kind of. And the type of obedience that needed to be offered by Israel was an outward, external obedience, maybe even the type of obedience that could be offered by an unbeliever formally, like a Pharisee type of obedience. And then if somebody slipped up, they could also remedy their situation with the outward observance of the sacrificial forms, which were also provided to provide restoration and forgiveness, although it would be an outward external form of restoration and forgiveness in the land.
Okay. I think I've got at least two things to say to that. And Will, I want to hear what you have to say. Number one, behind the entire Mosaic economy is the reality of creation and the original covenant of works. And we know, I hope we know, that at the core of that religious relation, compounded by the covenant condescension of God, is face-to-face fellowship from the heart. So from the very beginning of creation, God only and always demands pure, perfect, heart-level obedience.
Your banner of truthing before my eyes right now.
So the notion that God would demand only outward, unbelieving, Christless, bootstrap, formal obedience would contravene the very essence of God's relationship with rational creatures.
When has this ever been encouraged?
Are we denying that God demands perfect obedience from the heart from Israelites as image bearers?
No, certainly not. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. But we are distinguishing um, the function of the obedience in the Old Covenant from that of the function of obedience for believers and what they were able to offer and what was acceptable according to the Old Covenant. And their outward obedience is matched by an outward forgiveness in the sacrificial system.
The temporal blessings uniquely offered by the Old Covenant are what are
Correct.
conditioned by that outward obedience. It's not that God has suddenly stopped his demand upon the Israelites as image bearers and saying, you no longer need to obey me perfectly from the heart as established at creation as image bearers. He's not pausing that and saying, now you only have to obey outwardly to the letter. Instead, he is giving them some unique blessings not offered to other people in the world. He's established a unique relationship with them, giving them these outward blessings in the outward Holy Land, and he's conditioned those unique blessings upon outward obedience to the law.
Right. And I think that let's not be abstract here. Let's be concrete. This is what we mean. What God demands of the Israelites is ceremonial purity. He says, you will worship me. You will worship only me. You will worship me in the way that I have established and ordained and instituted in the places that I have established and ordained and instituted. And so God demands their loyalty. He demands their worship. He demands that they love him and serve him and obey him. And that is part of the old covenant. So if we ever say, there's sort of this outward arrangement of obedience that really just doesn't matter, it's not important, it's not of the heart, that's not what we're talking about. God is demanding that they be his people according to the flesh. Abraham and his offspring, all of them marked by circumcision, they are his people and they are given Canaan and they are to live there and worship God. And so the law of Moses, it not only organizes, but it also strictly um, determines the way in which they are to worship God and the way in which they are to be holy. If you do this, you are holy. If you do not do this, you are unholy. Or if you do this, you are unholy. And so the holy versus unholy laws of the Old Testament of the law of Moses, that's what we're talking about. An outward obedience and an outward holiness, or a ceremonial holiness. If you touch this thing, you are unholy. If you eat this thing, you are unholy according to the flesh. And the sacrifices restore that outward ceremonial holiness. So if we think about the kings, the Davidic kings, as well as the Sumerian kings or the northern kingdom kings, and if we think about the exile, the curses that are called down upon them from Deuteronomy and applied to them that remove them from the land, what determines the goodness or badness of a king and what determines tenure in the land is whether or not they are maintaining an outward ceremonial purity, whether or not they are maintaining the holiness that the old covenant demands of them. And so, because they are not worshiping God correctly, because they are offering polluted sacrifices, because they are perverting justice, all of these things are the reasons why God pours out the curses upon them. So, when we say outward obedience, we're talking about maintain justice in the land, maintain purity in the ceremonial system, the worship that God has instituted for you and for this people. And that's, I think, a much better path forward than contrasting, or it's better to say that than if we just say God demands outward obedience. Of course, that kind of phraseology is going to be liable to a great deal of criticism. But if we get specific about what God commands in the old covenant, it's to some degree a measure of just reading it off the page. Okay, God demands this holiness, God demands this justice in the land, and when you pervert that justice and when you pervert that holiness, then God will discipline you and curse you and cast you out of the land, which of course he did. So that's what we're saying. And we're saying that all of the Israelites could do that which was just in the land, and all of the Israelites could do that which was ceremonial pure and ceremonially holy in the land.
And just a quick comment there. So in the OPC report and republication, they make a great deal of emphasis upon the idea that no work could ever be acceptable before God unless it was done in union with Christ and spirit wrought obedience. So they would say exactly what you described is impossible for a sinner. They can't do anything that would ever please God. And I think to that we would say, first of all, we have the Noahic covenant that is stabilizing all of creation upon this common grace platform. God is giving common grace benefits to all of these creatures that don't deserve it. He's allowing them to live and eat and breathe. And upon that platform, he's established this unique relationship with Israel where he's giving them, we could call it very heightened common grace blessings. He's given abundant food, wonderful land, victory in wars. And on that platform of common grace, he's saying these unique rewards are conditioned upon outward obedience to the law. We're not saying that they were pleasing to God in and of themselves. We're saying that they simply met the condition for reward that he offered.
Which would be what Brother Camden mentioned of ex pacto merit. This allows you to stay in the land because God has arranged it that way covenantally. He has given you the land freely as a child of Abraham, but he demands your justice and ceremonial purity to remain in the land, which so long as you retain that blessing. And so that is according to God's design and according to God's covenant, which he is free to make with man as he pleases.